Welcome to Alexandrians with Daniel Karim, where I interview authors, both living and dead ones, through the power of AI. In this episode, I speak with Dr. Rubin, best-selling author, collaborative leadership expert, and one of America's leading voices in public and nonprofit leadership. We talk about his journey from educator to thought leader, the principles of collaborative leadership, how to build unity in divided times, and what it would take to end the current American Civil War. Please enjoy this episode, and if it speaks to you, like and subscribe and support our guest by buying his books. Thanks so much. Enjoy this episode. Welcome to the show. Thanks so much for dropping by.
It's a pleasure. I'm glad to be here.
The pleasure is on my side. We know each other almost, it's been a year in a way. And I think for me, time has gotten a little bit slower, I think, than from your end, but you have made a big impact on my life. So far, you have been always encouraging with your advice and with listening to me, and I'm very grateful for that. And I hope that some other people will find meaning in this conversation that we're going to have also. But first, I would like to ask, what's the story of your name? What's the meaning of your name? Where does it come from?
Well, that's interesting. I haven't been asked that question since I was a child, I think. I go by Hank. My full name is Henry. My last name is Rubin. Um, uh, I'm of Jewish parentage, and in Judaism, you don't get named after people who are living. You're named after people who have passed, who you want to memorialize and raise their spirits and survive their spirits. So my mother's father, who apparently was quite a character, died right before my parents got married, and I inherited his name, Henry. And and then when I was very young, there was a television show. The name of the show was Henry Aldrich. It was kind of a Dennis the Menace sort of show. Your American viewers will know what that's about. And it was a kid. It was like a just barely pubescent kid who was always getting in trouble. He was cute, but he was always getting in trouble. And the opening scene of this weekly serial was this boy doing something that was a problem, stealing a piece of candy at the grocery store or something of that nature. And the grocery store owner would see him and start chasing him with a broom, and he'd be running home to escape. And he lived on a little farm with a cornfield outside the farm. And you'd see the corn swaying as he ran. Keep in mind, this is the first 2 minutes of the opening of this show every week. And his mother, who was a big woman, would see him running towards the house, wipe her hands in the kitchen on her apron, and then walk out to the front door and call out his name. His name was Henry Aldrich. And she would do that, Henry Aldrich. And that's how the show started every week. And everybody saw it in fourth grade. And so when I was out in the play lot playing with kids in the fourth grade, they would yell over Henry Aldrich or Henry Rubin. And I decided in fourth grade that my name was Hank. So that's the longest answer I'm going to give you to any question you pose today.
I
But
hope this is an empty trap because I actually I love the stories that I get out of I guess and friends of mine too. Um, what was your childhood? How did you grow up?
um, I am blessed. I'm absolutely blessed. I had two very loving parents. My mother used to tease that all she had to do was give my father a kiss, and he would do absolutely anything in the world for her. And it was true. And My father was an ex-Marine, World War II Marine, and barely got out of high school. And very simple, very clear-headed, very direct, and the kind of guy who, as a parent, his philosophy was, so you want to know what it feels like to fall out of a tree? Here, let me help you climb this tree. And that's how I grew up.
What do you think is a story your parents used to tell that is somewhat sweet but a little bit embarrassing for you, where some of the early roots of your character manifested itself?
Uh, well, one is that um, my mother would always, my mother um, was grew up in New York City, and uh, she uh, began as a secretary in a law firm, and was so good at that. She would correct the legal briefs. She always kept a full encyclopedia of legal books available, read them from front to back, and she would clean up the errors that her attorneys would make so that they would look smarter as they made their presentations. And the law firm got together, put together a scholarship, and she was about to be the first in the class that accepted the first women at NYU Law School, as she told it. And she did, of course, what so many women of that generation did instead. She got married and never went back to that, but continued to do that kind of work throughout my upbringing. And she really did correct all these lawyers. They loved the dickens out of her for that. Um, um, my well, it's funny that you asked that because I can give you an answer to that question that is the predicate for just about everything that we're going to be talking about, I think. Um, I was young when in my hometown of Rochester, New York, that I've now returned to. Um, that Rochester was either the first or one of the very first East Coast cities, Northeast cities, to have a racial conflict on the streets in the 60s. Um, it had to do with Eastman Kodak doing some very bad hiring. Eastman Kodak, of course, is the um, camera fame, and uh, uh, it was singularly the largest employer in the Rochester region. Um, they did some very bad hiring, very discriminatory, and there was some very bad policing that was going on that itself was very discriminatory. And I'm a little kid who had always been concerned and confused about issues of race as we drive through parts of the city. And I'd see how people of different skin color were living differently than others and were being treated differently and so forth. And I'm just this little white kid driving around in a car, being driven around in a car. And so in the 60s, 1964, we had that riot. I'm watching on a little black and white TV. And I'm seeing local police beating up local people, and I'm very confused. And I run into the kitchen and ask my dad, why is this happening? What's going on? And my father, true to form, true to form, my father turned to me and he said, I don't know, Hank. I don't know why it's happening, but if you get all your chores done around the house, I'll take you down there and we'll find out.
Mm.
So for about 4 or 5 days, as I remember it, we'd hop in the car. I'd run around the house and clean up. And then my father and I would get in the car and he drove me down to Joseph Avenue where it was all happening. And the very first day, there was a family that sort of adopted me, a local family there, black family, that adopted me. I remember they had 3 kids, all boys. And I think what they did is they forced the 3 boys to accept that they were going to sort of watch me and make sure I didn't get myself in trouble because I was just a little 11-year-old kid. And so this story culminates in what ended up being a real um, important moment in my life that shaped the trajectory of my life. And that is, we're sitting on the curb. The oldest of the 3 guys and I are sitting on the curb, middle of the summer, 1964, and right in front of us, there's I don't remember what it was, but some physical violence was going on between a police officer and somebody. And, I'm watching, middle of the summer. He's a tall, skinny kid. I remember long, skinny arms, long, skinny legs. We're sitting on the curb on the side of the street watching this. His legs are so long that his knees are touching his chin because I was a short kid back then. I remember looking up at him and he looked down at me and he went, "Boy, one day you're going to have to figure out where you fit into all this stuff."
Mm.
And that became the moment I refer back to as shaping the trajectory of my life. So I'm sure we're going to come back to that story somehow or other because I always do. But that's the answer to your question. Probably a
Yeah.
bit more
It's a big
impactful
it's a
than most
beautiful answer.
stories.
Like one of the words I like from Kierkegaard, he says a thrown is this sensation of being thrown into the world without being given a manual on how that particular habitat actually works. And that was a topic growing up for me too. Like I grew up in a neighborhood where lots of immigrants grew up in a way. And it was a very young population. And sort of many of my best friends were from Ghana, out of all places in a way. But some were from Russia, other from Turkey. But there was this strange thing about this environment where it's like it was not exactly clear who we were, how to how to behave, and all these kind of things. So rules had to be made. What do you feel was that for you growing up in a society where they were figuring out how to live together? Because I feel while immigration is beautiful, it's like one of the things is that new rules have to be formed, and when new cultures come together, what was that like for you, so to say? Where I remember, for instance, that in the 90s I watched a lot of movies about the riots in America. Like another name that comes to mind is Watts, for instance. And I still remember like the scenes where it was like, oh, it's one of like what's happening over there? Like these guys are not at peace with each other. And it was very interesting for me to see like a global power eating itself up from the inside out, so to say, without being specifically able to put a name on what's going on. What was that like for you in that age?
That's terrific. And as it's a terrific question. As you and I talked, as we prepped a little bit for this conversation, I never asked you if I can ask you questions back. So I'm just going to assume the answer is yes.
Yes, of
Um,
course, of
so
course. You know me, I love talking. It's like, but you have to interrupt me then. So it's like people primarily come to you. But it's like, of course, yeah, it should be a dialogue where I feel like that's usually how I feel the best exchange of truths and stories is being conducted. It's like I feel it should not be that the interviewer is invisible because I feel sometimes it doesn't allow the other person to completely open up, and then it's at least my thing. I just think this as a meeting between us where we talk, and maybe other
well,
people can listen.
you and I have stuck around in each other's lives in no small measure because I knew what the answer was already. I mean, we
Yeah.
just there's a great simpatico, there's a great empathy between us here. Um, so in your case, were you residentially segregated, or were all these diverse kids you were growing up with in the next apartment building, and down the street, or were they blocks away from
It,
you?
it was a bit strange because like due to my family went through some, as many families do, due to the strange situation of my father who was came to Germany as a spy among many other things, and then fell in love with my mother, and they married, and this move for him like sort of disconnected him from his home country where his family was, and he was like persecuted for it and didn't have a normal passport anymore. And in the process of him living in the underworld, we lost a lot of benefits from that a traditional family has. And during the time where I lived in the environment that I just mentioned, my father was not there. He was in prison actually, and I remember that the neighborhood was outside of town. It was like it had a bit of a reputation for being the roughest neighborhood of the whole town. In a way, probably not nothing in comparison to some of the stuff that's going on in New York, but it had like a ghetto-ish kind of environment where the poor people live, and the poor people in my city were usually people who had immigrational roots. So it was like people who started their new. So it was very tall building, like the projects building in America. So there was this, I think Nietzsche called it the like this underdog mentality, or this in a way. So that's like how we bonded. But it was very strange because from a cultural sense, it was a sense of all of us being orphans to some degree, because we are um, there was such a diversity of cultures that in theory it made sense, like that we would exchange our stories, but it felt more that we were amputated from our roots, and that we were very susceptible to creating like sub communities where the young people made the rules, and young people, like I had a gang, for instance, and we were very stupid in the values that we had. Like, I don't know, I remember like we went out and stole bicycles and candies and broke into apartments and had adventures, and it was kind of cool. But it was like what the thing was missing, that I feel like in a normal culture you're being given a story of who we are and what the common vision for the country is, and that was not the case because we were all coming from different places. And I feel like that was one of the reasons why many of my friends had like criminal involvements or were not good at school, because we were a little bit like the lost kids, so to say. So it's like, in some sense, yes, we had all different cultures and ethnicities, but we all had like a blank check and didn't really know where we are from, and thus also didn't really know where we are going. And I think that was one of the reasons why we didn't do particularly well in school, also because we were like kind of had to figure things out for ourselves. At least this was what for me. What was it like for you?
All the layers of what you're talking about are really compelling. And that's kind of what I thought a bit of what you might include in your thoughts on this. Proximity makes a huge difference in terms of exposure, and exposure makes a huge difference in terms of opportunity to build relationships. And building relationships plays a huge part in our capacity to really understand and get behind the eyeballs of other people sufficiently to be able to not only understand them, but to empathize and engage and to build the sustainability into the relationship such that you not only learn, what can be written in a textbook that describes their life, their heritage, their history, and stuff like that, but you can learn how they are motivated towards what they're motivated, how they feel, and why. And that becomes a huge part of the capacity, I think, to understand and to build the kind of relationships necessary um, to elevate or destroy, to elevate communities, because it all happens through those relationships. My experience here in the States is that proximity was not available in large part very often. We had to work to create that. We had residential segregation. Um, um, there's a reason that Chicago has the moniker of a nation of neighborhoods. It has a history of being very welcoming to immigrants and refugees from all over the world. But you live over there, and you live over there, and you live over there. And the residential segregation makes for terrific restaurants. You get really authentic, lovely, family-owned, intergenerational restaurants. But you also have intergenerationally schools that are entirely one ethnicity versus another,
Yeah.
and neighborhoods that are like that, and so forth. So we don't grow to understand each other up till the point that we intentionally create vehicles for engaging with each other. And so, again, going back to your starting this conversation beginning in our youth, yours and mine, um, that, in my youth was the beginning of the whole movement towards intentional desegregation, intentional social interaction, intentional diversity, conversations, where we would set aside tables and we'd make them the hot spot in the cafeteria at the colleges, and you got a free dessert if you sat there and had conversations about race or politics or ethnicity or religion. And we would create incentives for people to sit, talk, share, and get to know what each other is about. Um, and so, you know, that it's no small. I don't want to jump into where this and almost every conversation I get into ultimately leads in this era we're in right now. But one of the reasons that we are in a moment where all these social systems that support the notion of equity, diversity, social justice are being vilified and attacked legally, is so that we revert back into our isolation, so that these relationships become more and more difficult to be had. In the absence of those relationships, it's easier to be authoritarianly governed. So it's all that sort of stuff going on. And you're right to base this. It goes back to the conversations we had in our youth. We never, I think, lose those lessons, and they get operationalized both for good and for evil, I guess.
What was the question that growing up that you did? I feel sometimes problems also pick the people in some strange sense in a way. What was like? I feel like you're a world-leading expert in your topic. I feel and sometimes I feel that there's an accidental early childhood specialization that occurs for people to be particularly interesting in a topic for long enough to get to the bottom of it. What was for you um, a nexus moment, so to say, that made you more interested in your subject of interest than someone else, for instance, who is just an academic from university or something like this, who reads about this without this being the story that is around them. Does the question make any sense to you?
Yeah. You could tell I'm jotting something down. I'm going to say, um, hold me to four thoughts on this one, okay? I'm going to start with privilege. I'm going to go to um, a story about a professor I had, um, um, and then experience I had as a professor and as a dean, and then my return to Rochester. Um, so the privilege is, and you and I have talked about this. I'm a tall white guy who's reasonably articulate. I had the opportunity to experience some of the finer higher education institutions and public education, K-12 as well, pre-K-12, um, and often just because of my privilege and because of my the sexism and racism of our growing eras, um, um, I would walk into a meeting, I would walk into a room, and people would say, "Okay, the leader's here. Hank, take us where we need to go. Hank, take the podium, or Hank, take the chair, and help us achieve this." And it was great for my ego. I went through a very arrogant stage in my life because, of course, I must be that good because everybody assumes me to be a leader. And I began to realize um, that it was a gift I was being given to explore leadership because I made more mistakes than I made successful decisions. And um, I had I had the gift on the one hand of either friends or people who saw potential in me. And very, very often they were people of color. And I would say or do something in a meeting, and this was from my early 20s to now. Um, um, I would say or do something, or you know, prioritize something or something of that nature within the work we were doing. And I'd get pulled aside, often by my lapel, and somebody would say, "What the hell are you doing, Hank? Do you know what you just did? Do you know what that sounded like? Do you know what that felt like? Where did that come? Do you know what that word derives from? Do you know what that principle takes us to? Why would you have done that?" And I'm sure that very early on, my reaction was kind of the traditional white reaction, white liberal reaction. And it was, oh, come on, I'm a good guy. I'm one of the good ones. How could you think that of me? But I learned very early on that the right reaction to that is help me understand that I'm a product of my family, my religion, my neighborhood, my city, my time. I need to learn to shed the things that got us where we are. I need to understand them so that I can resist, reject, repair. Um, and and so I had those friends who helped me see it. So that's one thing. I had the privilege, I was shoved into it. I had access to higher education. So I not only had the chance to experience it, but to study the heck out of it. And I had these friends and colleagues who would help me see myself. Now, when I got off to um, one of my universities, University of Chicago, I took a course that was an extraordinary course. I was the only undergrad in the course, as I remember it. It's called Ordinary Language Philosophy. Ordinary Language Philosophy. And there was this wonderful professor. He was a little guy. This was, again, back in the 70s. And he had on a suit and tie, and he came into class, big class. There was at least 30 kids in the class, I remember. And again, I was the baby in the class. And the very first day he walked into the class, he went to the front. He didn't say a word. He put his briefcase down on the desk. He looked at us out of the corner of his eye. He turned his back and he went to the wall-to-wall blackboard in the front of the room. And he started writing words and formula and equations and everything along the front of the room. And the room was absolutely silent, seeing only his back and what he was putting on the board. And for about 10 minutes, he just filled up the board. And he turned around and he said, "What's that say?" And nobody had the vaguest idea of what he had put up there. And he turned back around, he took the side of his hand and he rubbed out, like with an eraser, about a 3 by 3 section of it. And he wrote 3 or 4 words in a sentence. I don't remember what they were. I wish I did. He wrote it down. And he said, all that I have up there reduces to that. You want to sound like a smart person that, is so smart you can't get anything done, nobody understands you, but you impress the heck out of everybody? Talk like that. You want to get something done, learn to reduce it to this. So that was the second one. Reduce the complexity to simple, teachable, memorable principles.
You're a great orator. If you would take the corpus of your literary work and do what your professor did and summarize it to a statement maybe that is representative of your work, what do you think it would be? What do you think is an underlying belief or something you wanted to convey? Because I feel like great experts and artists and authors, there's usually something that can summarize to one sentence that they want others to know, that permeates their work. Is there something that you feel is that if they can only take away one thing from studying your work, and what do you think that would be?
Um, Great question. um, I'm thinking about how far I want to go with this, not what the answer is. I have a
You
very
can go as
specific
far as,
answer.
but on my way here, I went past the Jewish graveyard in Berlin. I need to show you the one day. And it's like, and everybody has an epitaph. Like it's one sentence. And when I was thinking, I was like, damn, like I always take 10 minutes to just explain. I say a lot without saying anything sometimes, you know? So I was like, wow, if I just have one sentence for the rest of eternity to represent me, I was like, that must be so hard for these guys to figure it out. In your case, what was the story that came to your mind, or a feeling or something in regards to this underlying message that you had?
Okay, well, you opened up two doors. So I will give you two answers. One of them I'm going to sit on for a second, and that's the simple, the simplicity of the primary message of my work on leadership. But because you opened the door with that reference to passing by the Jewish cemetery, let me tell a relevant story with that
Please.
as well. Um, I shared that I was raised Jewish. And so in my community, when you're 13 years old, we're given at my temple, we were given the opportunity to spend an hour asking the rabbi any question we wanted, because we needed to know it as we were going forward into adulthood. Of course, we were adults at the ripe old age of 13 now. And and I remember asking Rabbi Karp, um, how are we as Jews supposed to deal with the issue of mortality and immortality and life after death and all that sort of stuff? And as I remember it, he said, we're allowed to think about it like the rest of the world often thinks about it, that there's a place up there you go to if you've been a good boy, and there's a place down there you go to if you haven't. But here's how it really makes sense to think about it, I remember him saying. Um, and it is that you live for eternity in the hearts and the minds of the people whose lives you affect. If I affect you positively, I live in your heaven, I live in well in your mind. And when you talk to friends, colleagues, offspring, you say, "Oh, Hank, yeah, it's a good guy, and he did this and he did this, and we're better because of that." And then I'll live in their heavens, and they'll pass me along. Now it diminishes over time, of course. It's one of the reasons I write books, but it's it is a form of immortality. You live forever in the hearts and the minds of the people whose lives you affect. So you want to do as much good for as many people as you are capable of doing that good for. So that just you just got that story out of passing through the cemetery, looking at those phrases that capture people's lives. The response to the question of that one message, that reduction, that professor got me thinking about when he rubbed the board, or led to my thinking, is this, um, that we have libraries that have been written in the millennia on the question of what is leadership, what is good leadership, what is the purpose of leadership, why should people lead, stuff of that nature. And I think we overcomplicate it. I think there is a very simple and direct answer to public sector leadership. I'm not talking about private sector, it's a different context. But in the context of public leadership, we exist for one purpose as leaders: to make change happen. And if change isn't happening, you're not leading, you're doing something else. You may be a wonderful person. There are people who hold leadership roles in the public sector for decades, and they're wonderful people. And they percolate their mission statement over and over and over. But if decades after they start in their position, you don't see marked reduction in poverty, reduction in homelessness, reduction in illiteracy, increased welfare, health health indicators, better housing, whatever it is. The mission represents the change. And if the change isn't happening, you're not leading, you're doing something else. And so that brings me to, my last two quicker things. One is I used to be a dean of education, and I would, and this was the context in which I sort of had the revelation on leadership and change, because I would have these wonderful young student teachers come in and they'd look at me with tears in their eyes and they'd say, Dean Rubin, I'm working as hard as I can and I'm teaching, and these kids just won't learn. And I remember I felt great sympathy for them, but I felt anger at the fact that their professors hadn't conveyed what I'm about to convey. And I'd say, let's just remind ourselves, what's the purpose of teaching? The purpose of teaching is to cause learners to learn, students to learn. And so what happens if students aren't learning? Well, there's a breakdown. Well, yeah, the breakdown is pretty clear. If the students aren't learning, you're not teaching. The change we're looking for is metrics, attributes of learning. And if we can't find those indicators, then they're not learning. And that means that whatever we're doing with them or in front of them, it's not teaching, it's something else. So I found myself coming back to Rochester actually for my then 90-plus-year-old father for what I thought was going to be just a short sort of staycation with him for a little bit. And I got invited to a public event of a lot of people who I had known 30 years earlier when I left Rochester. But of course, nobody knew I was in a room. It was a room of about 120 people. And they were talking about what didn't matter what the issue was, but it was a social issue in Rochester. And I was in the back of the room, ran out of chairs. Nobody knew who I was because, I couldn't even grow a beard when I was in Rochester before. I'm in the back of the room and I'm seeing these people who I had known 30 years earlier in their birthing of their leadership roles. And all the social indicators associated with the roles that they were in had fallen and not grown. Our literacy rates are not better. Our homelessness rates are worse, et cetera, et cetera. And I realized in that moment that these people have not been leading. They're managing very well. They're administering well, but they're not leading in the public purpose of meaning. So those are my stories for you on it.
I love that you just share. I want to just pick up on the last part you mentioned in regards to my last company was called the Behavior University, and it was based on the idea that you can measure whether or not somebody has learned, or even like for yourself, if behavior change has occurred or not, in a way. And it's like like this old saying is like you have to repeat a class until it is done teaching you, or something like this in a way. And I used to repeat many classes that before I got kicked off from school. Like I remember this. I was making the same mistakes over and over again. But one of the things I just found very interesting is managers and leaders are very different people. And I feel that one of the things they're very different, even from a personality perspective. For me, a leader is one of the preconditions is that they actually know where we are supposed to go. So there needs to be a vision in place. Managers and operating people, like I'm hiring as a chief operating officer at the moment. These people they can look around the corner, but they don't see something that's going to happen 5 years from now or something like this. And I feel we have a generation of people where there's no story in place. And for me, growing up in the neighborhood that I mentioned early on, the thing that I hated about was the story that permeated my environment and the bad school which I was on, which was nobody was expecting anything that would come out of us. So it was like there was limits in regards to how far we could go. And whenever I turned on the TV in regards to America, I felt that you were going to psychological issues much more than racial issues, or so to say, where there were belief systems that manifested itself that needed to be shaken down. You're always a person I feel who's doesn't shy away from big challenges and responsibilities. How did your father or other mentors you had early on install these foundational qualities that a leader has? That I feel like any teacher is a leader also, right? It's like he designs the curriculum and he helps these people change, so to say. How did you learn some of this stuff, and what are some stories or some lessons that one of the programmers of your childhood or of the earlier stages before you were fully formed had on you?
I find it fascinating whenever I do a podcast that I uh, I do the same thing with a podcast camera as I do when I'm sitting with a good friend or a colleague, and that is I find looking in their eyes as I'm thinking about something distracting because I'm thinking about how they are seeing things when I do that. And you're asking me to go into how I'm seeing it. So I'm stopping myself from looking into the camera as we're talking so I can reflect on myself rather than on you. Um, um, I think that, you know, I grew up, I don't think I've ever put the following words together before. Uh, um, so I don't know if it's a great question or a little bit of an intimidating question that you're asking me. But um, I grew up in an era where, you know, even though my father's generation had just put down all those Nazis, um, the the rough cowboy Western white guy was the one who was going to come in and solve the problem. That our notion of leadership was John Wayne. That you know, somebody with broad shoulders and a full head of hair was going to come in and either find the resolution or impose the resolution. And I found that at odds with the principles I was trying to deduce from my interpretations of Judaism and my young work in the field of social justice and problem solving. I mean, you know, I was my hometown of Rochester. I'm going to ramble a little bit here because that's what I do as I'm trying to find an answer. I think that, but um, when I was a high school senior, I that was the age at which I was first starting to be elevated into leadership roles. We had 40 high schools in the Rochester region. And we had at that point, I don't think it exists anymore, a student council of student councils of the city of Rochester. It was called Teen League. Um, and um, it would, it had two different components. It had a council of all the high school student councils, and it had a social activism side. So it did stuff like marches for open housing and stuff of that nature. Hike for Hope, which was a walkathon for the USS Hope, which is that ship that provides health resources or health. I don't know if they're still doing it, but had it at that point around the globe. Um, and I look back at that and I looked the part. I was given everything to do the part well. And with one or two exceptions, we had a terrific hike for hope. I look back at that and say, boy, the best I could say is that I was given a lot of opportunities to learn from my mistakes because I had nobody in there who was authentically coaching. I had a lot of people who were expecting things. I had a lot of people who threw things at me. I had a lot of people who made fun of the fact that I had the presumption of thinking I could do this at that age. Um, but but I didn't have either the wisdom to seek out or the network of supporters who would say, let's sit down and talk out that issue so you can see it from its multiple perspectives and perhaps learn different strategies from those different perspectives that could be integrated, assimilated, or built into something that could work across the differences and accomplish achievable steps towards measurable steps towards whatever you're trying to accomplish. Um, and I think that that is what I realized is missing. We assume that once we're given a title, to go back to your question, that once we're given a title of leadership, people think I'm a leader, I must be a leader, I'll act like a leader, I'll do leadership, with or without a knowledge as to how to do it. I think that there are places people can go to for leadership training, but we still have a culture in which that's seen to be, what Namby and Pamby people do. It's not what real leaders do. I don't need that training. I'm a leader already. Um, we don't create, even when we have retreats, um, um, there are very few of those retreats. Although I have seen it happen, there are very few of those retreats that open the door to the kind of introspection that allows people to really imagine what it would take to engage with another person sufficiently, as much less multiple other persons sufficiently, to cause them to want to join with you in accomplishing the change you're promoting. And that's really what leadership is about. It's getting somebody else who brings something to the table to look and say, that's an issue I care about. This is a context in which I believe an investment of my time or wisdom or whatever, money, um, can actually cause that to happen. This is a person I think can sustain the relationship long enough to cause it to happen, plus solicit and engage the necessary other people to help make it happen. Yes, I'll follow this. I'll join this. I'll let Hank lead. And that's what I think you need.
I love that you just shared this, and we share also. Not sure I've ever mentioned this on a podcast. One of the reasons my father was persecuted was because he converted to Judaism. He's so it's like they are to the arch enemies. So he was like traitor in the eyes of many people, and it's like, and for me later on, I was very late being gifted with all the stories of the Old Testament, so to say. And they have been a great discovery for me to develop my moral character. And I was just last week with my father. He has this little cabin in the woods, and it's surrounded by forests and wolves, and it's almost like a place not of this earth. And I was really struggling with the financing of my current startup. It was like, it's venture capital is not really an opportunity because they want a 4-year exit. I'm trying to build something for eternity, so it's a bit difficult for me to think this through properly. And I asked my father, and he just smiled, and he said the question, "Do you think King Solomon uh, paid the people who helped him to build the temple?" And he shared like there's different forms of compensation you can have, and then we watched this movie, and it was with like an old movie about revolutionaries and like from the 40s or something. And I realized they also don't have a salary, so there must be an opportunity to get people on the same side to collaborate on a goal without the particular resource you don't have. And I know you also have a lot of experiences with getting projects off the ground that are a bit outside of the box. What would you tell somebody who has, or what did you learn about nonprofit leadership, or or leading a venture that doesn't fit the normal path, which is I'm just going to optimize for profit and make a business that makes money? Because I feel I'm in Berlin, there's like these beautiful cathedrals, for instance. Many of them took hundreds of years to build. So it's like these, if you have a 3 year, 4 year exit strategy, you can't build something as a visionary that goes beyond to the future. Can you share anything about this chapter of your life?
Well, it goes back to my uh, Henry Aldrich story almost. Um, it is the clarity of the change that you're trying to achieve and the capacity to articulate it in terms that are viscerally and practically meaningful to the people you need to engage and sustainably relate to in order to make progress towards the achievement of that change. So it has to be meaningful, as in touching the identity of, the self-identity um, of of different targeted people. So the leadership is making change happen through sustained relationships with the essential people who can contribute to the achievement of that change. Those relationships are almost never not utterly voluntary. Even if you're told to be at the table, paid to be at the table, if you don't viscerally want to be at that table, your contribution is going to be something less than substantially helpful. So the question is figuring out who those people need to be. And we can clarify that pretty well. I mean, the people reduce essentially to three categories. One is who are the experts who really know about this. If your issue is religious freedom, or your issue is third grade literacy, or your issue is homelessness, who are the people who really, really understand what the root causes are, what the policies are that impact it, what the socioeconomic conditions are that impact it, what the psychosocial dimensions are that impact it, et cetera, et cetera. You need to find experts who understand this in a way that informs the change you're trying to achieve. You need to identify the essential decision makers. So if you've identified the change you want to achieve, and you've identified the experts, you're going to need the people who can turn the key on whether the essential decisions on policy, on funding, on whatever it is, can be made. And if it's not the people who can make those decisions, it's the people who understand how to influence the people who can make those decisions. And then third, and at least as important, if not more important, you need the stakeholders. And the stakeholders are the people who live the experience, who can say, that looks good on paper, but let me tell you, in the real world, that's just not how it is. You need the people who have been struggling with this and perhaps failing. You need the people whose oxes are gored by this. And even though they may be impediments, they may be people who have been approaching it for the past 15 years in all the wrong ways. If you don't figure out how to at least engage a relationship with those people, you have an enemy who's going to be taking pot shots at you as you're working on this going forward. Because I've spent my life on this, and you're going to pick this up and try and make it happen. I'll show you. And so it's a matter of really thinking through the broad range of who the people are who are needed in sustained relationships to achieve that particular change. And in each one of those relationship building interactions, you're considering how you have to adapt and think about how you articulate, how you measure the change you want to achieve. And you are growing deeper and deeper in your own sophistication of how to even think about that change. as you're struggling to see that change through each of those different people's eyes, because that's how the wisdom grows of what that change really entails. And then finally, you need to have a system, a process that holds those people together long enough to get that change happening.
What is a belief you no longer held that at the beginning, where you didn't know all these things, was occupying you? For me, for instance, one of the things that is new to me is I'm a very autonomy and personal sovereignty are big words for me. You know, it's like I come from uh, when 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 no government is helping you because your father doesn't exist on paper anymore. You develop a strange relationship with trusting that somebody is going to come to help you. You know, you are like you almost overcorrecting to the degree where you are the cavalry. It has to come from you. I'm at a stage, however, where collaboration is the only path forward to me in a way. So it's like, what was like, for instance, like a personal hurdle for you as a man to get over to play this part properly and to get this done? For me, for instance, like um, asking for money, for instance, donations, fundraising, all these kind of things, they are something that is right now new to me. What is like something where in your own life where you had to get over that, and how did you learn those kind of things? Very vague question, and but that's what I wanted to ask.
So it's very good, and it's there's a lot of layers to it, and it's interesting. If I'm not mistaken, and you can run back on this after we're done, I think it's the first time you referred to me as a man, and that enters into my thinking on this. When I was little, um, leaders were great orators, and they talked with deep, resounding voices. And the sentences all were totally intact, very well rehearsed, and they always came from the depth of your chest. And as a kid, I used to, because I aspired to lead, I used to go on my back porch and give speeches to the dandelions in the backyard, and I would talk like that. Um, and I thought charisma was important for leadership. That's some kind of chemical characteristic that gets people to go, wow, I don't want to follow that guy. And then I did some work actually with, when I was very young, I was in my early teens, I was a tween actually, um, um, with a bunch of nuns and in Rochester. And it was one or two, I guess, very quiet, um, but very sturdy, steady, consistent, clearly strong, smart, didn't take crap, but lovable. And everybody who came into contact with them knew that they were going to help you get where you wanted to go if you lined up with them. And I realized that it wasn't being able to talk, it wasn't charisma, it was a capacity to build a relationship where people look at you and say, if I line up with this person, I'm going to be able to do some good things. And and so that was a big lesson for me.
Yeah, it's
I'm realizing as I'm talking to you how, um, on an unconscious level, developmental level with me, different religious experiences have played a bit more of an impact, had more of an impact on me than I'd realized consciously. Very interesting.
for me. It's like my father is one of the most encouraging people I ever met, and we talk. He talks in stories also, and we, for me, those old stories, hearing them in a way where I can understand them, they are all like leadership examples to me, where we would pinpoint where, like, where does God manifest itself in that particular story through a virtue in one of the characters that is being displayed in a way. And I feel like that's something that I maybe like a good follow-up question would be is like what how if you think about now, how has religion or your ancestry has shaped you? Because for me, navigating into adulthood had a lot to do with me finding God or God finding me, And that was one of the things that was missing in the earliest chapters that I described early on. Since we were coming everywhere, everybody was coming from everywhere. Nobody was armed with the religious tales of their communities, which, in my point of view, are behavioral blueprint on how to survive. And so it was like that's what I felt. We were naked to a degree, and even though we felt like we were very tough, we made all the mistakes in the book and suffered tremendously as the consequences. And some of these people never recovered from it. How did you? What was your experience or encounter with the stories of old, and how did you become a person of the book, if you would consider yourself to that community also?
Um, I think I don't consider myself a religious person, and I don't consider myself even spiritual. I don't think. Um, but I think that I'm a social scientist. I'm trained as a social scientist, and so I'm trained to believe that human beings created religion. Religion and God did not create human beings, and that it is a vehicle for answering questions, um, disciplining social order, stuff of that nature. Um, but along with that, um, in as a person trained in the social sciences, there was an extraordinary course that I took, both undergrad and then graduate, experiential psychotherapy, in which we explore the extent to which the unconscious is brilliant, is genius beyond our conscious capacity to comprehend. The wisdom of the universe exists in each one of us. And our smartness as human beings is our capacity to dive into that hidden smartness in our subconscious and to identify more and more in our subconscious and move it to consciousness. That is the process of becoming smarter. That's why people meditate. That's why people drop into their souls to find their deeper meaning, and stuff of that nature. And that it's not that the wisdom of the universe exists in God, but that it exists in each of us, and we carry what we attribute to God in each one of us, and that is an extraordinarily powerful capacity that each one of us has a responsibility to plumb as deeply as we can. And so, that's that's sort of my take on the religious side of your question.
Yeah,
The
it's. I want to pick
Yeah,
up on something. That's very
no,
interesting
do
that
it.
you're mentioning this, because I feel like it's sort of like an in contrarian belief in regards to what you were trained in. For instance, like you just mentioned psychotherapy. It's like one of the quotes I really like is from Socrates. It's like it's education is the kindling of a fire, rather the filling of a vessel. And one of the fathers of psychotherapy is Carl Rogers, and Carl Rogers is a former priest. And like he, for instance, like one of the beliefs that he held precious was that it was the curative exchange of truth that provoked healing in a way. So it's like even like what we are doing right now, it's like if we are honestly pursuing truth and goodness, it feels that there's a part of us that gets bigger and stronger in some degree. And it's not just an exchange of information to some sense. And I'm not quite sure that university is even a concept for who we are as a species. I feel like they are using the wrong tool to have a look at ourselves. So one of the questions I wanted to ask is, did you have an encounter with something divine over your life now that you're in 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 a more advanced stage in a way where you feel like the current tools that I had to make sense of the world do not integrate that properly, because that was something that woke me up, like the meetings with my father where I saw that it's possible for people to just reject to die, for instance. It's like it's that had an impact on me where I was like, that doesn't make any sense metaphorically what's happening here. Did you have any encounters with the supernatural or with the divine or with God or with religion that you feel has shaped you also in some sense?
I wish I could say, yep, and here they are. I've got to say that I'm kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Um, I'm kind of unsophisticated in that arena, I guess. I I I was with my father as he died, and it never occurred to me to look to see if there was a moment of spirit left. Um, there was a struggle. There was sort of a moment of resignation, and then there was nothing. Um, I wasn't in the room when my mother died. Um, hers was a rougher death. Um, but I always thought that she was here and my father was here. Um, I never thought that I lost him to that. Um, and it's my job to, in whatever subtle ways I can, because it's anybody who's watching this who has kids know you can't be anything but subtle when you're doing this. When I'm trying to sort of carry my parents and even myself into my kids' lives, I have two, that you don't hit them over the head with anything. You just sort of gently integrate it as best you can into whatever the circumstance is that you're dealing with. And so, my so I guess the short, it's interesting because I'm trying to come up with a philosophical response to your question, and I don't have it other than to say that um, I think that my understanding of spirituality is that we live forever in the hearts and the minds of the people whose lives we affect. And so, therefore, my commitment to spirituality is to always touch as effectively as possible towards positive change the people whose lives I can affect. Um, and and those of us who say that we're going to do that in our families, that's leadership in your families. Those of us who say we're going to do it in our block clubs and neighborhoods, that's leadership in a broader array. Those of us who think we're going to do that in the politics of our cities and our regions, or in the books we write, or whatever, we are targeting a population who we're investing in with the hope that we're going to live forever through the good they can do or are inspired to do as a result of the relationship we have.
I think one of the things that also is a initiation moment, so to say, is just gonna speak in genders right now. A man's first battle. That for me like was a transformative experience in regards to when you think of your career as a leader, what story comes to mind when you think of the word a fought you fought or like an any like some form of enemies you guys had, like when you think about like the struggle in regards to overcoming something, what are you thinking of? And because I feel a leader, yes, it's provoking behavior change, but I'm a very simple person. For me, it's also the essence of survival, the essence of making sure division isn't dying to some degree. It's a protective element to any part of your life where you were walking against forces that were trying to destroy something you took care of, or something where you entered the arena in that sense. Even though like you're still doing this right now, I feel, but it's like in regards to the corpus of your work, what do you think about? Or in your personal life could also be.
Well, the one that comes to mind, I'm not going to name the location, um, but it was an interesting battle that almost came to fruition, but was killed. Um, the the idea was that this urban public school system was really weak, ineffectual, very low performance. Um, Anybody who could afford not to send their kids to those schools didn't send their kids to those schools. And I mean, it was profiled. It just wasn't performing. I mean, there were little pockets of success, but across the board, the numbers were very, very bad. And the decision was, the hope was, the prayer was, that the vision was that this community's schools could no longer, after decades of efforts, be tweaked or modified into excellence. That what was needed was um, um, a complete redo to redesign, to stop the education as it is, and to redesign it from the ground up in terms of curriculum and attendance areas and technology and contracts and vision and everything. Um, Going around to find the best examples in the world, engaging the local parents and kids and teachers and experts and decision makers in finding the outstanding example. What, first what we want it to look like for our own schools, our own district, and who in the world is doing it really well that we could learn from, and copy and capture and bring back to the home community. And a whole year was spent in putting together who would be the experts and the decision makers and the stakeholders who would work on this. And the decision makers had agreed that when the time came after 2 or 3 years of the work to design this, that efforts would be made to close down the old system and simply turn the key and open the new system so that there really would be a transformational moment. All that pre work was done. And then one of the funders decided, well, this is a lot of work. I can just go hire an expert who will tell us how to fix our schools. And so they pulled out, they hired an expert, and nothing came of it, except that the plug was pulled on the momentum and the resources to make that change happen. So after a year of building that collaborative network that was about to launch the redesign effort, that one philanthropy pulled the plug on it. And that to me is one of the most painful examples in my history of having come close to the edge there of really being able to do something really good and falling off it.
Do you think there's something deeper wrong with Western society did? This is my thinking. One of the things that's very strange for me to cope with is I'm in Germany. It's like I grew up in one of those schools you just mentioned. So it's like if I would have not been the asshole as a teenager and they would have not kicked me out, I think that education would have ruined me, to be honest. Because through me being expelled, I and the penship that I had with my father, who was in prison at the time, I was connected with one teacher who believed in me fully in a Morphean sense, where he's like, if he would have, the whole world would have told you that guy has no talent, he would have not believed you. And through him and the books that I was being sent from him and from my mother, I suddenly had a personalized education. There was specialized, particularly for the topics that I was interested in and I was good in. And one of my fears in regards to the current system, this general Preussian approach, is that it's a system that is so rotten or dysfunctional from the original basis is that it's not fixable. It's like one of the things that I'm learning with working with engineers on the AI platform I'm gonna show you is like you you first want to figure out like if something is repairable. You want to, that's important. It's you have a deductionist mindset. It's like you don't fix something that should be deleted altogether. Do you see something in regards to how we're living where you feel we're not grabbing a deeper problem that is permeating some of the struggles that they have in common? For me, for instance, it's strange for me that we give our children to the state and they educate them, and we also give our elders to the state and elderly homes and take care of their passing, and the mentally insane are also being institutionalized. Everything that's institutionalized is very strange to me, and as coming from a psychotherapeutic background, it feels very Oedipal in a sense where the state still seems to have some form that they should not occupy, where it feels like some sense of personal responsibility has been lost through the advancement of these operational systems that govern us.
I want you and me to promise each other that we're going to come back into this conversation every 3 or 4 months, okay?
Please, Nick.
Because I'm concerned and convinced that the era we're in the United States and internationally right now elevates your concern to its extreme. Um, we are we are at a culminating moment in the breakdowns of our social systems, economic systems, political systems, rational, relational, cultural systems, and we could probably do more of our breakdown of those systems that comprise life. But we're at a moment when all of them are being simultaneously threatened, which is an extraordinary opportunity for people like you, who drag people to a couch and say, let's talk about this. What are we going to do about this? What is our role in this? What is the implication of our doing nothing about this? Um, and and so this conversation has to happen universally now, because we're given, and I'm not an historian, and I get my historical facts wrong all the time, but every age of wisdom, of enlightenment, of opportunity, of great artistry, of great theological understanding, of great et cetera, emerges out of an equal and opposite era of negativity and damage and miserableness, misery. And so we're being given a gift right now where the question that you're asking is not hypothetical, where the question you're asking is, so what are we going to do? And that's the power of what you're putting together and what we need to do, and people your age and younger need to start picking up the mantle, because we have failed. My generation has perpetuated the kind of divisiveness, cultural segregation, layering, um, um, and we could apply all sorts of different descriptors to it. But we perpetuated it even as we talk about trying to undo it. And so we need new minds, new approaches, new strategies for leading differently going forward.
Yeah, why do you
And
think
that's where
it's
go ahead.
I love that you just shared this is um I think for me it's interesting to see this entire thing because like through the upbringing I just shared with you, it was like I never felt particularly belonging to any community. Like 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 I was half German, half Lebanese. My father is somewhat Jewish, and my mother is German French. So I'm like, even in my own country, like I was always like half perpetrator, half victim in any sense, in whatsoever. And in growing up like by myself, it's very interesting to me when people from the outside are so defensive of their community because I never get it. Because for me, I was more interested in making sure my family is fine, that I can contribute something, but it was never representative or felt belonging to any kind of movement or so. What's going on in the United States right now feels it does not feel democratic in the sense of where it's a healthy state of you scream about this belief systems and you scream about this system. And because people generally around the world, it feels to me like they are afraid of things escalating in a way. And it's like Ukraine is not far from where I am. It's like there's demonstrations here every day. So it's like the global war is being discussed quite frequently. And then I'm always coming back to thinking that there has been leaders in the past who somehow still found ways to bring people of different color, different belief systems, different together at the table and talk. Like doing a ghost for the platform I'm building for Nelson Mandela, for instance, and he, after the apartheid was gone, brought people together to talk again because he realized they need to coexist in a particular state. What is your situational analysis of what's happening in the United States? And what do you think is could be a solution to bring people back together and avoid this it's almost like this cultural civil war that seems to be manifesting itself because the waves of that is going to go around the world.
I think civil war is an apt description. Um, there's no way on earth that I have an answer to that question. Um, but we have to be looking for the answers to that question. Um, this is um, this is a more dangerous moment. People say we've survived more than this, worse than this. I've never been black. I've never been a slave. Um, I would say that slavery was worse than this. It was ipso facto, you are dead. There's no question of how you're going to end your existence as a slave. And so that is worse. You're going to suffer and you're going to die. Um,
But this feels to me threatening to the very survival of our species. Like I'm in Germany, we had like slave labor camps here. But for me, the very thing that makes this so peculiar is that the escalation of the global conflict right now will lead potentially to the end of our species. That's like what I'm concerning about. Like I'm not a very political person, Hank. I like to ride my motorbike and I like to spend time with people I like, smoke some cigars and read books. But this for me seems like in strange situations where like it as somebody who has brought different parties together, if you could write a how do I put it a prescription for the United States on how to make peace with people who of different opinions, like what would you write on it in a way? And what is your prediction for how this will end out? Like,
um, oh my gosh. Um, I I mean it's it can only go one of two ways, down or up. Um, um, some combination of um, absolutely essential authorities are going to have to line up and bring it to an end. I don't know if those absolutely essential authorities are domestic. Um, there's talk because of the meeting of the generals and admirals last week that there's a prayerful aspiration that they will join together and march into the Oval Office and say, you're an enemy of the state, and we're not going to um, abide by this any longer. We're not going to follow your orders.
So just to
And
summarize this as a neutral member of this conversation, because like my position is a little bit like I'm building a library where I would like to house all kinds of people, regardless of it. But the situation in the United States is that I assume you're more on the progressive liberal side, is that there's a consensus that a potential change of government needs to happen before the runtime of the current administration is over.
yeah, there has to be a change in government. We have, um, and I made a conscious decision to limit my use of the word progressive and replace it with mission driven, um, because progressive necessarily has taken on a political definition of you're either progressive or conservative, you're either red or you're blue, and where I want to get to in a couple of minutes, but it's post this question, is perhaps how we can lead to reduce the red blue, um, the perpetuation of the red blue distinctions. But I do think there's going to have to be some vehicle, whether it's international forces. It looks like the UN is not capable of doing that. I'm not sure if NATO is capable of doing it. I don't understand international diplomacy nearly as well as most folks would, or I should. So I don't know what that capacity is. I do know that our Congress and our Supreme Court, the two vehicles that were established constitutionally to check on this kind of malfeasance, um, can be reconstructed in a way that it steps forward to assume the leadership and bring it to an end. It doesn't look like either one of those is capable of being reconstituted to play that role. So it's either the military or an outside force. I don't know if the Pope is in a position to be able to influence that as well. It is quite incredible that this is the first time we have an English-speaking Pope who comes from the heartland of the U.S. And so we have, that as prospectively a variable in all this. But um, this is not going to, it's going to stop when it runs out of momentum or it gets confronted and halted. He's either going to,
Interesting question that I have for you is I remember a conflict that I had with my mother, and it was like there was some sort. I was a teenager, and I was like 15 or something. And I have a tall brother. He's like, I'm 2 meters, he's 2 meters and 10. So he's you don't want to, and he has the strength of an ox. So he has a very bad temper. So you don't want to pick a fight with that guy. And I was very disrespectful to my mother because she was talking about something I felt was outside of her comfort zone. I just didn't listen. And he said something like along the lines of, like, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's like just because you still have to respect the rank even though the person may be wrong. And one of the things I'm worried is in the United States is like, is there some form of legitimacy you guys need to give to the opposing party ruling without destroying the whole system altogether? Because I'm not sure if my English is sufficient to elaborate what I wanted to say. So that's like my thinking. It's like the moment you start thinking like this game is no longer worth playing, is you destroy multiple social second like mechanisms also that are it's sort of the question I think I want to ask is this fixable, or is this a situation where you need to have
well,
a more substantial change of the system, so to say?
it's well, substantial change of the system, but it's either fixable or not survivable. I mean, those are the only two options. It is interesting on the question that you asked that at the time you and I are recording this right now, the United States is in the midst of a governmental shutdown because the House and the Senate um, could not agree on, the House actually could not agree on a, um, a budget that would sustain the operation of the government. Um, and um, um, and the last time that happened, the Republicans were in control of the House also, as they are now, and of the Senate. And at that time, last time, the Democratic Senate leadership decided it was going to give the Republican Senate the votes they needed to keep government open. You needed 60 votes. The Republican Senate had 50 something votes, and Democratic leadership agreed that it would work to provide the requisite number of Democratic votes so that the budget would be approved and the government would be open. And the Democratic Senate leadership almost got removed on the basis of that, suffered great reputational harm. But their position was we've got to show them that we are prepared to be bipartisan, that we are prepared to work with them, that we are prepared to make government work the way government was supposed to work. And the lesson that came out of that, I think, is that what we're facing right now, I'm sure you're hearing around the world, is Democratic public as well as Democratic leaders saying to other Democratic leaders, stop making believe we can work with anybody else. We can work with the Republicans. Stop making believe this is the old way of doing government. We cannot compromise. We cannot acquiesce. We have to fight to win and not to negotiate a comfortable middle ground. There is no middle ground. So this time the budget was not approved, and the negotiations are not going well, and government is closed and will probably stay closed for at least a few more days. It's going to be interesting to see how it resolves itself, but I'll bet you a dollar to a donut that we're not going to see a bunch of Democrats say, well, we're going to show good faith and we're going to show the Republicans that we can work with them, because there's scarcely a Democrat who believes that what they've seen so far is good faith on the part of the Republican Party, much less its leadership. So, getting myself in all sorts of trouble, I'm sure, saying all this. I think that all that speaks to the need for the system, the structures to change. The players need to change and the structures need to change. I don't have the wisdom to understand what that could look like, but I do know that we're starting to hear, first of all, the numbers of people on the streets are tremendous, are huge. But then again, the numbers of Israelis who were on the streets before the attack 3 years ago, is it 3 years ago now? Um, um, were in the hundreds of thousands, and it did not bring down the Israeli government. It did not stop the Israeli government. Um, um, I'm hopeful that in America, where we've, you know, fine-tuned uh, public voice and public action, that we're going to figure out how to use that to really cause government to behave differently and be different. But I'm not confident. This is very different. And you're darn right that this is a threat well beyond our shores. Are we going to be at war because of cigar-shaped boats that we're throwing bombs at halfway around the world to distract from domestic politics here in the US? Um, it's a moment that it's a moment beyond my consultative skills.
I had a client once. He had an IQ of like you could feel when you're in the room of that person. He was like a supercomputer, and whenever that person didn't have a goal, oh boy, he would just rip himself apart, and he was just had this inner civil war. And I always remember that he was also very creative. We kind of discovered that he always needed to have a big undertaking to keep him from destroying himself. And I wonder what could be a story for America or like for the United States that could tilt the eyes of aiming at each other, but rather to on a nobler goal that is in the future. Because it feels like the aim seems to be off for me. That's like at least from my point of view.
So let me you just triggered something. We're in a complete screw up right now. We don't know where it's going to go. It's not going to go back to the way it was before. We don't want to rebuild what we had. What an extraordinary moment of opportunity this is, nationally and globally, to reconsider what it means to be a bastion of democratic vision and principle. To design it afresh. Is there a way that humanity can take this moment and say, listen, we're either going to blow ourselves up, like you started this question with, it could be the end of humanity, or it can be the beginning of an era. What would it take for us to reimagine a moment where this is a beginning of an era? Reimagine leadership from the ground up. How do we engage? Towards what do we engage? Who do we engage to develop what the vision needs to be for something that doesn't simply get us out of this mess, but gets us to what we aspire to be?
I couldn't agree more. It's a beautiful question. It's like, what would constitute a story for mankind that would be so adventurous, so meaningful, so exciting that we can agree to leave our differences behind in order to go there? And that's like something where it seems to me, when I was a teenager in the neighborhood I described, one of the reasons we would there was, I don't think I ever told this, there was once a month we organized fighting each other. Like there was like this empty parking lot, and we would it was an opportunity to measure our strengths, but also we didn't really have anything better to do. And I still remember that the moment I became a basketball player, I wouldn't go to these things anymore, because I realized I can show my strengths on the field. There are beautiful girls in the stands who I want to impress. And it was just like, that was better for me to dedicate myself to this thing. And I'm just wondering, like, if maybe instead of an answer, the United States needs a question again, that everybody is invited to join in answering this collaboratively. And I wonder if there could be like somebody who stands up and sparks this dialogue again, because it's certainly cool places in the universe to venture to, and it's there must be something that is cool enough to get all sorts of people on the same table. Or at least this is my hope, anyway. Or at least not go backwards to where we know it's awful. That's the,
Oh, that's right.
you know,
That's
it's
right.
like,
That's right. I mean, that's
yeah.
let's take that option off the table. I love that phrase. I mean, you've had you speak in poetry. I love listening to you. Instead of an answer, we need instead of a question. Instead of an answer, we need a question.
Um, as we're moving to the last part of the interview, if the leaders of the United States could listen to you right now, like what is by any chance they all turn into particularly this part of the podcast, and they listen, what would you tell them? As you
I've
are
got a
one of
new
the fathers of the United States, you're like I feel also like listening to people is sometimes very educative. What you want them to know based from what you share?
um, I'm an elder, but I can tell you the two children and new grandchild that I'm the father of. Um, the I have a new short little book out called Leadership Reimagined. Um, and I make a big point of saying that it's a first edition because even as it's gone to print, I'm already thinking, God, that's incomplete. I need to take this to the next level. So there's going to be a second and a third and a fourth edition, I'm sure. But the idea, the full title of that little book is Leadership Reimagined, a toolkit for mission-driven collaborative leaders as the world is pulling us apart. Long title. Um, and I think that's the message that while there are lots of people in leadership who need to be focusing on resisting the onslaught of pernicious changes that are happening, that need to be thinking about how to um, solidify and strengthen the strategies that are working towards the changes we aspire to, even in the face of what's going on nationally and internationally. We need to have a whole collection of people who are focusing on reimagining not just the vision of what we want to become, which goes to a whole bunch of the questions you've been asking, Dana. Um, you know, what is the alternative to what's happening right now? What should it look like? What can it look like? What do we aspire? But also, how do we have to lead differently? Our leadership got us to this point. I'm somebody who has coached people to be leaders. And I look around and the evidence says, gee, Hank, that's great. And you got a lot of wonderful people out there busting their chops trying to lead as well as they can. But all the leadership that I've helped to produce one way or the other, and that I've watched all around me, has produced the conditions we're in right now. So what we have to do is recognize that we have to reconsider how we do leadership. We have to reimagine how we do leadership. And that really requires a bunch of people, smart people, people like you, to be thinking about how do we lead differently. It's not, taking the model of what's worked in the past. It's culling out of what's worked in the past, the very essential sub-elements of that can be adapted and introduced in a whole new strategy of how to use it going forward. I use the metaphor, I'll stop with this on that question, that our public schools have become battlegrounds in the US between left and right, blue and red. But it's hard to find a community in which everybody wouldn't agree that having kids read at effectively at a third grade level is a very important precondition of literacy. And so we want all our children who are going to public schools to be able to read at a third grade level when they finish third grade. I don't care if you're red or blue, or if you believe in desegregation or segregation. I don't care if you like people who are brown or don't like people who are brown. You care about third grade literacy. Let's work on third grade literacy. Let's build schools that accomplish third grade literacy. And as we're doing that, you and I are going to get to know each other a little bit. Some of these barriers I'm an optimist, I'm a dreamer, may end up breaking down a little bit. But let's get to that third grade literacy, irrespective of where we stand politically. And in so doing, start building relationships that resolve the polarization, that tackle the polarization, that chip away at is probably more accurate, the polarization that we're facing right now. So that's where I'm putting my energy. How do we redefine, reimagine public sector leadership so that we're no longer creating us and them? We're creating a coalition of folks working on a shared change.
Not sure if I'm quoting this correctly, but one of my favorite speeches of American presidents is from, I think, Teddy Roosevelt on personal citizenship in a way. And it's what you just mentioned is actually having a goal and actually solving something. And it's like one of but the things that me as a I don't like governments particularly, to be honest. It's like I'm like through due to my history, I think you can make a case that I have reason to do so. But I'm an entrepreneur, so I fix problems, and it's like if I that's my job. I don't tell other people to fix problems. Like actually, my only way to exist in this world is to come with a solution already and do the hard thinking by myself, and then come out. And if the world accepted that I built this little screwdriver for that particular person, they will give me money or support or something. And one of the things that I really love is there's an old speech from Viktor Frankl. He's seen, I think, the end of this debate in a way, where he's been in Nazi concentration camps, and he's also has seen the overcorrection that happens afterwards, where there have been processes, for instance, to punish many of the Germans in a way. So there was the collective guilt that fueled the Nazis. Later on, became a symptom of the overcorrection, and he gave a very beautiful speech where he proposed to the United States that on the other side of the Statue of Liberty of the United States, they built a statue of responsibility in a way, which I find a beautiful idea to spark back a climate of citizens fixing actually the nation instead of outsourcing everything to the government and screaming for change, but instead like asking around and say, what actually could I contribute? And this is like I love the goal that you just mentioned, but that's like maybe also a cool question for everybody. It's like, in their realm of influence, can they beautify or improve some things and not just go on the streets and be these it feels to me as an entrepreneur that these activists are not very active at all. It's like so there seems to be still a small group of Americans out there who are actually working on the solutions and who are listening in a way. So that would be a question for me. How do we improve the people, increase the people who are actually working on solutions instead of waiting for the big brother, the overlord of the government to fix it for them?
Yeah, that's not going to happen, right? I'll tell you this. It goes back to an earlier question that you asked. Um, um, Back in the 90s, I headed up a school of public administration in Chicago, nonprofit and government leadership. And um, I was working on a marketing campaign for that MPA program, master's level program, and came up with a phrase that I have since stolen and used without any guilt whatsoever. Um, um, and it captures, I think, exactly what you said. If you can make a difference, then you have a responsibility to do so. And it captures so many different elements of what you and I have talked about today. If you can make a difference, then you have a responsibility to do so. It's a waste of what you've been given by God. It's a waste of what you've been given by your own attention to your own capacity and growth. It's what your parents have done for and with you. It's what your community has given you. It's what you look around and see as in need of change. It's also the answer to the question of your own immortality, because if you can make a difference and you take the responsibility to do so, then you're affecting the lives of so many people and will live there forever. So I think you hit on it right there that the change may not be a governmental change. It may be a sociocultural change where people who are regular folks who usually don't march, people who don't usually go to the library board meetings, people who don't usually get angry when they see a person who doesn't look like them walk into a school or a commercial enterprise. Um, when people, irrespective of what their bigotries and biases and prejudices or even aspirations are, but they identify something where they can make a positive difference, as small as it may be, and they say, "That's why I'm here." That's how it's going to change, because it has to be. Um, we know because the American democracy was built to withstand almost every kind of cultural change. But we sure figured out a way, a cultural change that beat the democratic systems created by our forefathers. Um, and and so what we have to do is not only find a way to change, adapt, improve the system they created, we have to change the culture, because otherwise that culture is going to come back and destroy the next iteration of the structure that we put in place.
I love that. And it's like, I feel like one of the things, Hank, that totalitarian governments always had in common was there was a sense of narcissism in them, where there's only your story, and everybody who has is of different opinion. Like I come by here by a place where the Nazis burned, like the National Socialists, actually important I think to call them what they are, burned books, for instance, of some of my favorite psychologists because they had different opinions. And I feel that universities have forgotten the very importance of talking to people of different schools of thought, and where the university are like these indoctrination clubs where only people who think exactly the same thing hanging out to each other. And maybe it wouldn't be like, for me, for instance, an individual who doesn't have people around him who has like different cultures, different stories, who can say no to that person, is that's a sign for me like, oh, that's a very narcissistic personality, because he would never allow somebody else to challenge them. So maybe also like to make some friends, as we mentioned earlier, from different camps and just normalize it. Because I find it very difficult, for instance, to negotiate with an enemy. He would never give me a fair deal. He would try to fuck me on whatever corner he will get the opportunity. But if you make a deal with a friend, there's a long-term something at stakes where it's like you don't want to sabotage the relationship. So I hope for the United States and also for Europe to make more, that there are more friends between opposing camps, no matter how radical it may seem to the party members that you are hanging out with somebody from the enemy camp. Anyway, let's
There,
move to the last
there's one
part of.
more
Yes, please.
there's one more implicit lesson in there, I think, too. We keep coming back to relationships. It's all about relationships. It's all about relationships. And so there are two essential elements: a clarity of the change that you want to make, and the relationships that you build intentionally and sustain strategically long enough to make that change happen. And that um, the we assume that leaders lead group of people. We assume that teachers teach classes of children or learners. But the reality is that when you stand in front of a classroom as a teacher, you are interacting in and through each individual relationship you have with the learners in that classroom. Each learner is making her or his decision as to whether or not they're going to learn from you. They're going to respect enough what you're presenting and be inspired enough by what you're presenting to attach what you're presenting to their memory banks and to their work. It looks like you're teaching the whole group, but each individual is making that decision. The same thing is true of leadership. And again, this came to me with that whole notion of, charisma. You're not charismatically leading a group of people. You are inspiring each person in that crowd, everybody in your office, every board member on your board of commissioners, every legislature in your council. You are inspiring or not each and every one of them to make the personal decision to engage with you on the cause towards the change you're intending to lead. And that's part of what we have to keep in mind as we're talking about changing the culture and climate of what's going on domestically in the US and internationally. We have to recognize that each one of us has the capacity to influence one or two or three other people and engage those one, two, or three people in the change process with us. People who would not otherwise have done so and may otherwise have even been oppositional to you. But because you found that one thing you overlap on, that you can work together on, you have the capacity to build a new relationship. And that's what we can really, if we want to leave this conversation with a note of perhaps some optimism, it is through our one to one to one to one to one
Yeah,
that we are
yeah.
going to be able to make change happen.
Yeah, I would even go so far, Hank, and say whenever you're addressing a group, it's actually a sign that you're entering the totalitarian school of thought, because it's I would say so. And as Dante Alighieri said, like, if the world is wrong, the error is in you. I'm going to point my finger. I think that the social scientists had something to do with this current form of thinking. And as a coming from a psychology background, you deal with individuals. You don't really deal with schools. And I feel like one of the preconditions to doing harm to another country is to see them as to bind identity to a particular political movement. It's like, and I'm hearing many bad languages when I turn on the TV. There are the settlers, there are the Zionists, here are the terrorists, and here are the propaganda. And I'm like, I think if you make friends with people when you speak about individuals, it's much easier to actually point out people who are actually doing harm, and also like say like, well, this country is currently being led by this person believes that, and this is the consequence of that, without dismissing with the entire population, because it's otherwise we are dealing with group guilt altogether with, and that's if we are dealing in group guilt, it's very easy to attack another country because they all guilty of whatever that particular minister is doing. But for instance, like I'm in the trenches of my startup. I'm not politically involved in what my leadership suite is. I'm not at a stage where I've left that part behind to some degree. So it's I don't even know like what these guys are discussing in their rooms right now. So I would like to be being held responsible primarily for the deeds of Daniel, rather than whatever somebody else is doing. Anyway, let's move to the last part of the interview, and then I know you're running on a clock. I call this last part Ezekiel questionnaire. It's a bit aligned with coming back to the importance of the word of the book, and having a couple of rapid fire questions for that. And then we're done. Um, what's your favorite word, Hank?
Oh, my kids are going to kick me for not having a quick, cute answer for that. You know, the I want to say love, I want to say optimism, I want to say practicality. I keep coming back to um, change, um, change. Um, um, if each of us were to say, there's something that I can cause to be different than it is right now, and I value that, and be prepared to invest in making that happen, then all the other valuable words flow from that. I mean, you engage people through love, you engage people through relationships, you engage people through strategy, through process, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, then we get into the machinery of pain. But um, and as I think about it, I've never been asked that question before. As I think about it, I kind of like using the word change because it ain't got no political persuasion to it. Um, let's just say that if there's something you can make better, then that's your responsibility.
A word you hate?
A word I hate. Um, well, all the racial slurs, um, um, racial and gender slurs. Um, 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 God, it's a good question. A word I hate. The racial slurs. I'm not going to name
Please don't. It's
them.
with YouTube these days is not as liberal as it used to be. Anyway, we're the actual liberals in this world who, in the actual sense of the word. A quote you're striving to live by.
Oh, I want to make a difference. I mean, it's because I
Like,
live in quotes,
yeah,
that I make a difference in as many lives as I can, a positive difference in as many lives as I can. Um, I aspire to make that change happen. I mean, they're my own quotes. I'm going to have to change that. I have to. I'm making a little note to myself here. I've got to have a quote that presents me as being a little bit more humble than quoting myself.
I think it would
So,
be. I think it would be very cool. I had a content format where I would quote myself for a while too. If you could resurrect an author from history or a leader to have dinner with, who would you resurrect and what would you ask them?
I wonder if at this moment, if Abraham Lincoln would have been sufficiently comfortable to reconcile the relationships with the military leadership of the Confederacy. um, and um, the slaveholders and the politicians who fought so vehemently for slavery and for the Civil War. There was a period of reconciliation, and and then with his death, Johnson just did the equivalent of the dismissal of charges against the January 16th books. Um, that um, I wonder if that had not gone the way it went, would we have the Confederate flag reemerging today? Um, the most striking moment. There's one of the three or four most striking moments, political moments in my life, will always be seeing the Confederate flag in the Capitol building, being carried in the Capitol building. Um, and that's you know the enemy we died to protect ourselves against, proudly carried in the halls of our Capitol building a century later, not much more than a century and a half later, actually. Um, and so I don't know. Am I answering your question?
Very, very good. So, and these questions are more to trigger thought, but rather to get answers. Um, speaking if speaking of the presidents of the United States, if all the presidents that you guys had would write an advisory letter to you through time, what do you think it would say in regards to what's happening right now? Where you can be a representative leader or citizen of your country. I still think it's a very special thing to be a citizen, and it comes with great responsibilities. But what do you think an advisory letter from your ancestors would say?
Well, I'm going to flip your question because my ancestors were not the presidents. My ancestors, my father's parents came over from Poland and Russia. Um, my mother's parents came over from um, European states. Um, they've all settled down in New York City. Um, and my mother told the story of how during World War II, a gang of boys grabbed her as she was coming home from her secretarial job and brought her into one of the postage stamp sized parks that marked portions of the city. And there was at that time a granite or marble monument, and it had a Jewish star on it, Star of David on it. And my mother told the story of how they took her hand by her knuckles and they um, used the German word Juden, and they said, we're going to have you, your people are killing my people in Germany now. It's because of you, my people are dying in Germany. So these were young German immigrants who identified with the Nazi cause, apparently, or at least had relatives who were caught up in Nazism in Germany. And my mother, being Jewish, represented why they were at risk. Um, and and I think all we have to do is look at the fact that, um, as you and I are talking today, yesterday in Chicago, there was an event wherein um, ICE employees um, um, repelled from Black Hawk helicopters into onto a apartment building on the south side of Chicago. I've actually been in that apartment building, if it's the one I think it is. I've actually been in there. Um, and they pulled people out in their underwear and nightgowns or no clothes at all. And they, you know, treated them as criminals. Um, and um, and so the lesson from my ancestry is that if we don't do something about it, it'll happen again and again and again. That we haven't escaped it by escaping the geography of it. I don't live in Chicago anymore. So have I escaped it? I live in a smaller community now. Have I escaped it? No, we've had ICE attacks right here in my little hometown. Um, um, so we each can make a difference. We have a responsibility to do so. And if we don't, God help us.
Um, talk about this off air some more. Okay. Um, what author comes to mind when you think of the word punchable?
Punchable. Um, my son is probably laughing right now because he's a much, 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 much better reader than I am. Um, I go back to the social sciences with a lot of my work. I go back to, oh, and I'm not going to remember his name right now. Um, Austin, Austin, Aust. I don't remember if it's IN or EN, and it's not um, um, uh, the Austin of um, fiction. It's a philosopher who was in whose books I read in that ordinary language philosophy course that turned my head to how insightful and controlling the words are that we use to the people we are and become. That we cannot separate language from culture from behavior. Um, um, and even for those of us who don't have the capacity to speak, um, we think in either words or visions that cluster words. So I would go back to that. And the next time we get together, I'm going to have the full name of that author.
Okay, two questions, then we are out. You've been teaching also in your life, and I feel today I was also a student, even though I shared also some stories. What's a question I should have asked, being in the presence of somebody with tremendous wisdom that hasn't been asked, for instance, by some of the people who partated in your lectures?
Well, I resist, not because of any false humility, but just in general, the notion of this being wisdom. I've come to, in the United States, the position of the elder is really kind of weird. In white communities, in European cultures in the United States, the elder is really not really regarded, respected. I mean, people expect that when you reach a certain eldership, that you're just going to go off into the desert and die. Just don't be a problem. Just get out of the way because we know what we need to do. The Black community and other minority communities, but particularly in the U.S. African American Black communities, have a deep historic and cultural role for the elder. And I've always been jealous of that, frankly. And so I think that the respect for the elder is not so much the wisdom as the capacity to bring more experiences into the discussion, because every experience informs our capacity to make better decisions. So if you were a 30-year-old young guy and you're sitting with me as an old fart twice plus your age, and we're talking about how to um, um, uh, deal with homelessness in your community. You've got, in the best of circumstances, maybe 10 or 15 years of experience and readings and exposure to draw on. But I've got 4 times that I can pull into that discussion. And so we've got all these experiences, all these failed efforts, all these successful efforts, all these networks of people who were effective, who weren't effective, all these policies that were tried that didn't work or did work, all that sort of stuff. And so it's it's not wisdom, it's the willingness and the capacity to bring experience into in a positive and productive way, as opposed to hitting you over the head with it. Um, to bring the experiences in because you're increasing the data from which you can draw your best solutions.
I love that, and it's my project pretty much is to honor the elders. It's like to what degree what I'm building is a council of elders application. But to the defense of the American people, you guys also were thrown onto that place the same way I felt, I guess, thrown with all these people from different parts of the world. And some of the things that I feel happens is some culturally relevant habits. They get forgotten in the place where we came from. And one of the things that I feel we're doing right now is honoring of knowledge repositories in human form and sharing that. And I hope that there's some habits that are resurrected by the Western society that we used to have. That it's not just like the honoring of the elders or taking care of the younglings, um, that I think could make a tremendous difference. For instance, with the Catholic Church, like confessions were a thing, and I feel like this idea of salvation. I feel we don't have a good forgiveness mechanism in our society anymore, which is might be problematic in dealing with each other in the future if there's not a reset button. Anyway, I'm digressing. The last question, and then I will shut up. If this last part of the interview by any chance of time would be the only thing that would survive the test of time, almost like a dead sea scroll, what message would you have for future generations if this would be the only thing that would survive your legacy, so to say?
I'm going to beat the same phrases over and over again because I think they've survived this long because they work and they're right and they play a role in my life that's so important because I believe that they're right. Um, the first is that our immortality and our purpose is to affect as many people as positively as we possibly can. That the effect we have should be a change that is positively impactful and improves the lot or the quality of people's lives. And that change is what should drive us. And that we achieve that change, not in our solitude of raising the issue and crying it over and over and over again, whether or not anybody is listening or hears us, but in and through the intentional relationships we build to sustainably work and contribute towards the shared achievement of that change. That would be my nutshell of all this. If this were to be the only, 45-second portion of our conversation that survived.
It was an honor and a privilege to talk to you today, Hank, as our previous conversations were also tremendously valuable. To those who are listening, how can we support you in your ventures? Where can we find you? And what is something that the community of leaders who will listen to this can potentially contribute to your mission?
Is that a question for me?
Yes.
Um, uh, we need to engage in broader conversation. First of all, I just want to say this before you bring this to a close in such a way that I don't get a chance to say this. What you're doing is a gift, Daniel. What you're doing in terms of your professional effort is a gift. What you're doing in terms of how you manage and engage your conversations with people, and all I can speak to actually is me, is an absolute gift. So I thank you very much. And I'm dedicated to working with you to help make sure that your gift has the impact that I think you hope it will have. Um,
Thank you so much.
um,
Likewise.
well, thank you. Um, I don't know how to answer the question any other way than I have. Um, I think that my aim is to help people to think with the kind of principled clarity, the simple clarity of that 45-second piece that we talked about, a few minutes ago now. Um, that that if we can get our leaders to articulate that intention to make a difference, what that change is, how it will be measured, with whom and how I'm going to build the relationships necessary to get it done. And that I'm not going to stop what I'm doing until those changes are measurably accomplished, because that's what leadership is intended to accomplish. If we can, if you and I can bring that message out, if I can sit with people and have those conversations and say, it's not as complicated as you've been making it. It really isn't that hard. Let's break it down to its pieces and let's figure out how you're going to get your mission, your clarity of the change, your metrics of what that looks like now, 10 years from now, when it's achieved. Who are the essential stakeholders and decision makers and experts who can really make sure that that change is accomplishable and sustainable? How are you going to reach those people? How are you going to engage them? How are you going to sustain them? How are you going to measure the progress towards that change over time? And it's as simple as that. It's all on the back of a napkin that every one of us could stick in our back pocket. And if you and I can stuff that napkin into the pockets of thousands and thousands of authentic neighborhood, community-based, civic, local elected, regional, national, and related leaders, then we will start accomplishing the change we need to see happen.
Where can we buy your books, and where is the social address in the internet that people can continue to be connected to you to stay up to date with your newest project?
Well, there are two internet places, and it's in, I founded the Institute for Collaborative Leadership back in the early 90s, and the website for that is www.collaborative-leaders.org. And there's an author's website that's up for me, and that's simply hankrubin.com. HANKRUBIN.com. And that's where stuff on my most recent books will be. You can buy my books on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, most of the platforms you'll find on the internet. I have an erstwhile podcast that I started and stopped because of things that just happened, that I'm about to get started again. Very, very short podcast. The title of the podcast is Lead for a Change, intended to be a kind of a clever double entendre of, what is the purpose of leadership? It's change. And stop waiting for somebody else to lead. Get out there and lead for a change. And it's intended to be a 3 to 5 minute audio podcast, but we're thinking of shifting that over to some video as well and maybe expanding it. But we'll see what happens with that over the next few months.
Hank, thank you so much for dropping by today and sharing your wisdom. It was an honor for me. I would also like to extend my gratitude to everybody who listened to this long format content of this dialogue between me and Hank in an age where people's attention span shortens. I have a special appreciation for the true scholars of our generation who make effort and time to get to the bottom of things and to ask the right questions, hopefully. Thank you so much. Looking forward to see you in the next episode.
God bless you. Take care of yourself.